Welcome everybody to GoLocal Live. I'm Josh Fenton, CEO and co-founder. It is a beautiful day in Providence, Rhode Island, but we are heading right down to the University of Virginia. We've got Jennifer Lawless. She's the chair of the Political Science Department. Professor, thanks so much for joining us.
Sure, it's beautiful here too.
Excellent. Well, we are right down to the short strokes of this presidential election. New York Times Siena poll says 48-48. Not a lot of undecided there. Nate Silver says in an opinion piece in the New York Times a couple days ago, he thinks it's leaning Trump. Where are we right now?
We're in the margin of error. We're tied nationally, which means the popular vote is closer than a lot of people expected, I think. But we're also within the margin of error in all of the battleground states. So we just don't know. It's going to come down to who turns out to vote.
And who, your gut, we've got a couple of indicators. Some are older than others. 16, obviously, Trump got undercounted 2020. Indications Trump got undercounted in polling as well. But then you've got sort of this breakout, the Kansas vote on reproductive rights, where no one expected the turnout, especially of women coming out. Do we have an indicator as to which of these it might be?
I think it might be both, but not the way that we expect. So a lot of pollsters this election cycle are arguing that there's no such thing anymore as a shy Trump voter. Part of the reason that he was underperforming in the polls in 2016 and 2020 was that a lot of people were embarrassed to say that they were voting for him or that they were supporting him. That's not the case anymore. Republicans have embraced Donald Trump. They've taken him and all of the things that come with Donald Trump, and they're proudly saying that they're voting Republican. So it's likely that the polls might be more accurate this time than they've been before. But we also know that in the midterms in 2022 and in all of the special elections post-Dobbs, turnout among women was higher than predicted, and that will help Kamala Harris. So especially in states where there are abortion ballot initiatives. So we'll see, but it's really, really just too close to call.
Is there a shy Republican voter that Cheney has been playing to who would absolutely normally vote straight GOP, red, pull the master lever in those areas that have them, if anybody does anymore, but just simply cannot vote for Donald Trump? Is that a realistic subtext of this story, and is it a big enough number to help Harris?
So there definitely are those people. And in states like Maryland, where Larry Hogan is trying to become the next Republican senator, he's actually running a lot of campaign ads that are appealing to those kinds of split ticket voters, the people who always vote Republican but are going to vote for Harris this time. So there's no question that those people exist. The question is whether they exist in the battleground states that are ultimately going to decide who wins. And that's the unknown. We do know that in states like Maryland, where Angela Ashbrooks is ahead of Larry Hogan, but not by the same margin that Kamala Harris is ahead of Donald Trump, that there are some of these Republican voters who just can't stomach it and might not be saying that they're going to vote for Kamala Harris, but likely will.
So, okay, I get that differentiation between a Maryland and maybe a Nevada is significant, but is really the difference between Maryland and Pennsylvania that different?
Well, the difference is the campaign. So the presidential campaigns haven't been in Maryland the way they have been in Pennsylvania. And so the question becomes, to what extent have the Harris and Trump campaigns been able to target these people and quell their anxieties or win them over? In Maryland, they're just sort of sorting to where they feel comfortable going because there isn't a presidential campaign going on there. In Pennsylvania, that's certainly not the case.
Let's shift over to General Kelly's comments. General Kelly functionally called Donald Trump a fascist and an endangerment to democracy. This is his longest serving chief of staff during his tenure as president. Vice President Harris picked up that verbiage as well this week. Does it matter?
It seems like it's already baked in, which is kind of unbelievable. The idea that a former chief of staff, Mark Milley, who was, the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and various other military leaders like McMaster and Mattis have come out and also said that they would classify Donald Trump as a fascist. In any other election cycle, with any other candidate, that would be disqualifying. this is not something that anybody ever would have expected could bounce off of a candidate. But with Donald Trump, the expectations are just so different. Van Jones on CNN the other night said something along the lines of, he can be lawless, but she has to be flawless. And I think that's the kind of different set of standards that we've placed on Donald Trump versus everybody else. And it's just kind of baked into his overall approval rating or disapproval rating, which is really unfortunate, because this kind of assessment of him by the people who are closest to him and who worked most closely with him is a lot more damning than concerns about a particular policy on a given issue like the economy or crime or immigration.
As a former member of the Providence City Council when Buddy Cianci was mayor, returned to office as a convicted felon, I understand that verbiage quite well. Buddy Cianci was, despite his criminal prosecution, sort of, oh, ha, 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 Buddy being Buddy. That's really what it's boiled down to. What are the last sort of, what should we be, and I don't want to get to what's next week going to look like, but I do want to, what's going to roll out over these next few days during the campaign?
Well, wait, I just want to circle back to something. Although I think that it's totally unacceptable for a mayor to run City Hall as a criminal enterprise and for a mayor to engage in fascist tendencies, that's terrible. With all due respect to Providence, that's not the person who's the leader of the free world. And so
Right.
as concerning as it would have been for a major city in one state, we can think about how damning it could be for the entire globe if Donald Trump is actually elected and these statements are true. As far as next week is concerned, we're really down to the wire here. It looks like the Trump campaign is doing everything they possibly can to really reiterate their message to the people who are already on board. So this is a total base strategy. The Harris campaign looks like it's basically trying to throw two things at the wall. They want to motivate their base, but they also want to convince that tiny, tiny sliver of undecided voters that she's the best candidate for them. I think there's also going to be a war for the popular vote at this point. Kamala Harris, for example, tonight is doing a big rally in Houston. She's featuring Beyonce and Willie Nelson and other big Texas names. And that's clearly not because she thinks she's going to win Texas, but because if she can have a decent showing in Texas, that could potentially help down ballot candidates. It could help the abortion issue, and it could also get her several 100,000 additional votes when it comes to the popular vote column.
Yeah, that one's a little tricky. I'm not quite understanding why that's taking place in Texas versus taking place in Nevada or in Arizona, which are incredibly critical to her path to victory.
So I don't think it's an either or. There are going to be big rallies and big events in all of those states. My understanding of what's going on in Texas is, first, there's the possibility that Ulrich could actually beat Ted Cruz. It's a pipe dream, but like there's at least a little bit of hope there. And sending the Democratic machine there and really, really getting people excited in a blue city in Texas could really help him. But the other thing is, both sides have said all along that the healthiest outcome would be one that is pretty decisive. And a decisive victory means that you win not only the popular vote, but also the electoral vote, and that you win the popular vote by as much as you can. And so I think we're seeing both candidates do that. Donald Trump's rally in California, the fact that he might go to New York, is his way of doing the same kind of thing. He's never going to win those states, but if he can chip away at some of those margins and drive up his popular vote total, it's the same strategy.
As just a consumer, it feels like the Harris campaign is going VIP, celebrity, big names, a lot of Obama, Beyonce now rolling out, Eminem the other day. Is that an effective way to flip undecided voters?
I don't think these rallies are about flipping undecideds. I think these rallies are about making sure that everybody who's already committed is more enthusiastic than they've ever been and is going to spend the next 11 days knocking on every door, sending a million texts, doing everything they possibly can to ensure that voters show up. I also note that Donald Trump, and this was the case at the convention also, Donald Trump and the Republicans keep saying, oh, well, she's out there with her Hollywood elite and political figures from the past. I am 100% sure that if anybody from Hollywood or any former presidential or vice presidential candidate on the Republican side of the aisle had been willing to campaign with Donald Trump, he would have taken it with open arms.
Are you diminishing the power, the electoral power of Scott Baio? I believe he had previously endorsed. Yeah, that was Chachi.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I am.
You are diminishing that. But let's just stay on this for a second. I understand it that it's trying to energize the base a little bit, but does it miss the opportunity in these closing minutes to close up and try and answer the kind of the two key questions which continue to sort of fester, which is the economy and immigration?
On the economy, the numbers now suggest that the candidates are polling pretty much neck and neck. They have different strengths and different limitations in terms of different facets of the economy, but Harris has pretty much closed that gap. When it comes to immigration, it's clear that the Republicans have an advantage there. And I don't know that new messaging in the final 11 days is going to be effective. But the other thing I would note is that we have such an ability to micro-target, and we have such an ability to have different messages in different places in this country right now, that it's hard to know actually what each campaign is doing to convince that sliver of undecideds. It's not like old school where you'd be able to tell from the ads that they're airing whether they're engaging in a base strategy or a persuasion strategy. Here, they can do both things at once, and they can do it 50 different ways across 50 different states if they want. So we'll know a lot more later when all of the ads are analyzed and when all of the showing the digital ads versus the broadcast ads are shown, and we have those data. But at this point, I think we can assume that both candidates are doing that. We just don't see it all. You don't see it in Rhode Island, and I don't see it in Virginia.
So she could be targeting, the vice president could be targeting me with early Beyonce rather than later Beyonce songs.
Yes.
Absolutely.
That's exactly my point.
Let's jump over to the vice presidential candidates, Walz versus Vance. Do they matter at all anymore?
They matter only in that they're both highly energetic, they're both very effective surrogates for the campaigns, and they're out and about also. And so to the extent that a ticket can be two places at once, that's a benefit. If one of them was far less effective on the campaign trail in terms of ginning up support among the base, that could potentially be relevant, but it seems like they're both doing exactly what the campaigns want them to be, so they're probably a neutralizing force. And
Barack Obama, how effective is he? Listen, he looks great. He sounds great. Is in any way, shape, or form, is he a problem for her?
No. So I don't think this is a situation where people look at him and think, oh, I wish we had Barack Obama again. I think Democrats wish we had Barack Obama again, but understand that that's just not the way the world works. And when he's able to throw his support behind her with such enthusiasm, when she's able to come out and follow him with a very compelling speech delivered in a very compelling way, I think it's actually helpful. It's not like they're having her follow people who are not great orators, who are not articulate, who are not able to really make a case. She's following one of the best political speech givers of all time, and she's highly effective. So I think it's a feel-good moment when you see them together on the stage, when she's hugging him and everybody's just sort of happy. I think that's exactly what they're looking for. That's what they need for Democrats. They need record voter turnout.
Okay, so let's boil it down. If you listen to Donald Trump, America's in the wrong course. It's a country in distress. It's a country who's lost its focus, and he's the only one that potentially can put it back. If you look at the Harris messaging, it's about feeling good about America, moving it forward. It's two very different visions of America. Could it be that Americans are in a dark place, feel like we're on the wrong path, and thus that Trump messaging overwhelms the more positive, more forward-looking Harris messaging?
So political scientists have studied questions like this for decades, and generally speaking, positive emotional appeals fare better than negative fear-based appeals. And a good way to even consider this is the Reagan elections in 1980. I mean, it wasn't all doom and gloom. It was about turning the page and being forward-looking as a way to get out of the mess that the Reagan campaign claimed we were in because of Jimmy Carter. Similarly, in 1992, when Bill Clinton was elected, it wasn't all doom and gloom about the Bush administration. It was, let's focus on the economy. We can make it better. He did this wrong. Donald Trump's message might be about the future, but it's incredibly dark, it's incredibly fear-based, and he's also not really taking responsibility for the fact that some of the present, a lot of the present, is a result of his past. So I don't think that that's going to work as well, but I also think that we are more polarized now than we've ever been, and people are less willing to split their ticket and vote across party lines than they've ever been. So maybe it no longer matters what the message is. It just matters whether there's a D or an R in front of your name.
Okay, House and Senate, quick recap. Where are we? Senate's looking red, House is looking blue. That's been the sort of conventional wisdom the last few weeks. Does that continue?
Yeah, I mean, unless there's a major surprise in the Senate, or unless Kamala Harris really wins with crazy margins and some of these Senate candidates that were on the bubble wind up, benefiting from her coattails, it's hard to see how the Senate stays in Democratic hands. The House, I think, is basically too close to call at this point, but it looks like it's probably trending blue.
Okay, what should we be watching for this next week? We'll have one more visit together before the election. What's the kind of the Ouija board saying?
I think the two things to look at are, first, whether any of these battleground states becomes less close. And not only the polls will indicate that, but also where the candidates are spending money. And so Harris basically has an unlimited amount of money to spend between now and Election Day. Donald Trump has a little bit less, but there are super PACs. But watching where they're spending, watching where they're withdrawing money is a good way to gauge whether there are sort of surprises or expectations based on internal polls that our polling doesn't capture. And the other thing that I would look at, are these continued early voting numbers that are coming out. And they look like they're probably benefiting Democrats, but a lot of the registration numbers look pretty good for Republicans. So, continuing to assess those numbers. In Georgia, for example, the number of people who have cast early votes is through the roof. And that's a place that Democrats need to be in if they're going to potentially be competitive on Election Day.
There's no indication yet of any of the 7 states that are considered toss-ups to have any breakaway by either of the candidates, is there?
There's not, but I do think it's possible that, I don't think the blue wall is going to shift over the course of the next few days. Both candidates are basically living in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, and that's just the end of the story. But as far as Nevada and North Carolina are concerned, I don't know, there could be a situation where, Republicans and Democrats sort of come home and indicate that they actually are going to vote in Nevada for Harris and in North Carolina for Trump. So we'll see. I've said that, on election night, if Harris somehow does win North Carolina, that bodes incredibly well for her, because that's one of the 7 battleground states that looks very, very unlikely that she'll pick up.
Yeah, my early indicators, Delaware County, Pennsylvania, Biden won it with 62 point something % of the vote. That's kind of the one I'm watching. If she matches that or exceeds that, okay, could be a good night for blue. If she underperforms there, could be big troubles for the Democrats. Listen,
one thing I would just note about Pennsylvania is Harris's strategy is a little bit different than Biden's was. She's going to a lot of red counties to try and just peel off 7, 8, 10% of the vote there.
Yep.
And that's a different recipe to get the majority of the voters in Pennsylvania, to get to 50% +1. So it might not look as good for her as it needs to based on those 2020 comparisons. But if the margins in some really, really red places are favoring Trump by 70 instead of, 79%, that
Yep.
could be another path.
Jennifer Lawless, Chair of the Political Science Department at the University of Virginia. As always, thank you for all your input. It has been a rock and roll week this week at GoLocal. A lot of stories, a lot of big stories. We'll have coverage throughout the weekend. Stay tuned for much, much more. And this insanely good weather pattern continues for at least another week. 60s, 70s throughout October. Everybody stay safe. Enjoy their Friday. Thanks, everybody.